On this month's University of Arizona Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with instructional designers Reese Davis and Emily Torres and Shelley Rodrigo, Senior Director of the Writing Center, to discuss alternate grading practices.
Learning's hard. Learning is messy, and it's not just like checking a box. Most of the time, some of the best learning actually comes from failure.
Join us as we discuss pros and cons of alternate grading, strategies for implementing alternate grading practices into your course, and best practices for revising your assignments to meet students where they are. Hello and welcome to this month's episode of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. Once again, I am Adam Davi, Instructional Design Manager for UCAT, here with my co-host, Brian Hale. Hey, Brian.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, awesome. And this month we have an exciting conversation centered around writing and alternative grading and contract grading, all kinds of stuff. We're going to try to fit in as many fun topics into this session as we can. We've got two instructional designers with us from UCAT, Reese Davis and Emily Torres, and also Shelley Rodrigo, Senior Director of the Writing Program, is joining us today to talk through these awesome topics. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just jump into, kind of a buzzword topic right here of alternative grading or alternate grading. And so when you think of that term and, think about it in terms of coursework and instructors, what does that mean to you? And what are some examples of alternate grading methods that you either use in your course or you use in your design work? And we'll open it up to anybody who wants to start.
I'm gonna say, weirdly, I'll just start by saying that I've been thinking about this a lot, both in terms of my administrative position and also as a scholar. And even the timing of it is such as I'm revising a paper right now that's about a form of alternative grading. So my head's actually very much in the scholarship right now. So for this question, I'd much rather let Reese and Emily go first, and then I will respond in ways that I think are hopefully interesting.
Awesome. All right. Reese, Emily, you're up.
I can kind of summarize a little bit of my thoughts on it because I think we've already sort of addressed it just a little bit, maybe not on purpose, but coming up with the right word for what we're talking about. We kick around alternate grading, alternative grading, contract grading. People call it different things. So my way of thinking about it is that involving students in the negotiation of how they're grading, that could be one of these things, whatever we call it, whether that's alternative grading or whatever. But traditional grading is just based on the instructor's evaluation most of the time, and that's often specifically the quality, which that's subjective. We have preferences. So if maybe some of this, we're going to get in a little deeper on getting rid of all those conventions. But something to keep in mind is if the instructor's not quite ready for that, if that's a little too big of a leap, or some departments might have a problem with it, that just simply involving students in that conversation, involved in creating and revising rubrics, something as simple as drafting the rubric with the assessment for planning purposes, but then sharing that with students ahead of time to give them a chance to read the prompt, understand what you're asking for, looking at the rubric, asking questions, defining some of those criteria, some of those buzzwords that we use in a rubric, maybe getting a little more specific with student participation could definitely fall into this category.
Okay, awesome.
And with alternate grading, it can feel very foreign to us because most of us are probably, very familiar with the traditional grading. A student writes a paper, turns it in, gets an A, B, or C based on what might be considered a subjective set of factors. But the beauty with alternate grading is it's this approach where you're not really given these abstract letter grades for each discrete assignment, whereas there's an overall grade assigned at the end. And in the meantime, throughout the course, there's a lot of collaboration and feedback going on between the student and the instructor. So there is a clear set of room for improvement. Students can take risks with ideas because it's not as if, oh, if I try this one new idea or concept, I could get punished with a C as opposed to a B, which I really need for my GPA in order to do X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot more buy-in between the student and the instructor, and an ability to build a rapport and a relationship and some trust into the grading process, which is really helpful in taking that approach. So when you hear alternate grading, it can feel scary because it's like, how does this actually play out in a real life classroom? But really, it's just about a relationship building up front in the grading process.
I have a great example of some alternate grading. Shelley was responsible for this. It's a 101, 102 class where the instructor reaches out to the students and says, here's the syllabus, go through it. I want you to comment on it, ask any questions you have. And then while you're going through the syllabus, find one of the assignments. We're going to drop it. And it's going to be through democratic selection. The one with the most votes, that's the one we're going to just get rid of. And it was interesting to me that the cynic in me goes, oh, well, they're going to choose the hardest thing to drop. And they don't. They probably choose something that is what they consider to be busy work, or, and even lower, because they want to work on their skills at the harder assignments and assessments. And they want to kind of prove to the instructor that they can do what the instructor sets out for them. So in that 101, 102 class that Shelley put together, I thought that was just a great way of collaborating instructor and students together, and students working with other students to see everybody else's comments on the syllabus and how things were going to get graded. It just creates this great sense of community, and we're all in this together. And when you have that at the very start of your course, the course just flies by. Everybody has a lot of fun, and they're not so much caught up worrying about the grades that they're going to get on something because they've started this support structure in their class. So I think that's just a great example of how to make alternate grading a positive.
I love hearing how the iterations of things have changed over time, right? That my hand is not as heavy in the PDCs, pre-designed courses anymore once I took over the entire program, and to hear shifts and changes, or what's core stuff that's still there from my initial builds. I think though, or at least I hope this will be interesting to our listeners in thinking about alternate grading. Sometimes it's even worthwhile, I think, stepping even further back. And one thing I think that's inherent in talking about alternate grading is trying to separate. Most people collapse grading to mean both assessment, where you evaluate what is submitted, and feedback. So you'll talk about, you'll have, again, coming from writing studies, I've got a grade all weekend, and it's this drudgery of both. I have to somehow evaluate the papers, but then I also have to provide the feedback. And so I think Emily would start getting at this, trying this distinction between the assessment and the feedback, which also starts to get the distinction between the culturally constructed, what grades mean from the actual learning, I think is happening there too. Also though, but I think what is alternate part, the second part of the question of what examples of alternate grading is dependent upon what an instructor currently does and what their purpose for changing it is. So for example, whereas rubrics are now mainstream, they were alternate for a long time, right? Many folks started using rubrics because they were tired of bad assignments, right? They were tired of bad assignments. So wait, we're gonna tell the students the criteria we're gonna use to grade them. Shocking. I'm just saying, right? More than a few decades ago, that was alternate.
Right.
Let's actually clue them in on how we're going to assess them. Sorry. I mean, we have to laugh about this, right? But now, I mean, what's exciting about when we talk about alternate now is, we do have moves. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with Linda Nilsson in specifications grading, and we need more rigor. There is some legit, we know grade inflation is real, right? So I want to acknowledge that. We have folks a lot in writing studies wanting to unbiased, socially just. In that, we're seeing a lot of the labor-based or contract grading, but we see things about decreasing student stress. Again, both at least making the criteria aware, but also these ideas of talking about with students, negotiating with students, literally what's going to be assessed, how much, but also, and I mean, the reminder of this is supposed to be about digital, being faster and more efficient, and both in terms of, so right now I'm landing on kind of the 1-point pass-fail rubrics, especially criteria, not the entire rubric, but we can go down that rabbit hole later if you want. But also the digital systems in which we have to use them. And even those systems can help distinguish between how are we assessing it, how are we evaluating it that feeds into this final course grade, versus how are we leaving feedback, which we hope might contribute to learning in different ways than numbers or letters. Or even, I mean, some alternative grade systems are trying to decrease stress by not using letters and numbers, right? So I forget what it's called in D2L Brightspace, where you can turn on the words schema. Is that what I'm thinking?
It might be. I can't keep up with all their changes
right.
in the grade book, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's schema that you can change how the grade book shows things. All of those, I think part of what I'm making is, what is the alternative trying to do? And there's so many ways we're seeing those shifts based on needs of both students and faculty, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's hard to, completely break away from those letters, right? Because students, by the time we get them, at this level, right, they've had 12 years of knowing exactly what those letters mean, right? And even if they it causes them anxiety and they don't want them, if we do something different, then they're like, well, is that an A? They've been so conditioned with that as well. So, kind of breaking away from that idea, and maybe not necessarily breaking away from the letters, but that idea that this is our prescriptive way we do things, I think is hard. Right? Like you said, hard for students, hard for faculty to get away from that. But the feedback, to me, that's where I think we're missing, right? Like, what do we want from students, right? We want them to be successful. Is that I don't think anybody's in education if they don't want students to be successful. At least I hope not. In my heart, I believe that's true. So, how do we get them to that point of success and provide them the feedback to get from point A to point B, with the appropriate feedback so that they are successful? And, can alternate grading do that? Can that negotiation with the students, how does that help? And, what are some ways, other examples? Brian gave one, and Reese talked about it, and Emily and Shelley a little bit, but what are some ways that we can provide that feedback so that maybe students who start with skills at the beginning of the semester that aren't as great, but by the end they get to that point where they can get that A, because we still have to assign them the letter at the end of the semester, right? The university hasn't gone away from that. So what are some ways that we can help provide that feedback and get them there?
I think one of the interesting things about this is thinking about feedback, just starting with feedback. So with traditional grading, often the feedback has some, actual feedback for student progression, but it often is also very much grade justification.
Right.
You're explaining why they got the grade they did, which I think for most instructors, the intention there is absolutely to be helpful, but you're straddling a line. Whereas with some of these practices, you're really in communication. It's all about communicating with the student and telling them, what needs work, asking them where they feel that they need work, creating much more of a dialogue rather than just an explanation for a point.
And I think we've all probably taken a class at some point in our academic careers where you get your paper back and it's a B, and the only thing that separated you from the A was 2 missed commas. And it's like, gee, could we at least discuss the content of the ideas? Maybe I was really on the right track, or there was, some other concept I didn't really consider that really would have bolstered my argument. And that's kind of left off the table, and it's really focused on the mechanics, which are important. I'm not trying to discount that. Having that alternate grading concept where it is a conference and you are discussing the larger picture of your strength as a writer and bringing in other pieces of like, how did I do with my research? Like maybe I missed a really big database I should have been looking into or something. There's a lot more there that we could be discussing with students. And I think a lot of it will have to go back to how instructors even create their assignments and having assignments that are realistic and a lot of times need to be more career focused, in my opinion. And so it's not just about, well, maybe I'm in a writing class and I do have to write a 5-paragraph essay and that's just what it is, but focusing more on the process of, because most of us aren't probably writing 5-paragraph essays in our careers, but the process of how we go through, the rigor of, I need to do my research. How am I analyzing sources? How am I making my arguments? Am I thinking critically? Those core components do transfer. So having more focus on that, I think, is important.
And Emily, I'm so glad you went down what I'm going to suggest, this rabbit hole, especially with writing in 5-paragraph themes, because I'm going to at least acknowledge for that instructor that the difference between A and B, just the 2 commas, is because the commas are observable and measurable, right? I mean, we talk about that as rubric, right? They're observable and measurable, and they're even somewhat objective. I mean, there's some amazing research about how people assess correctness in different people assess correctness in writing. But anyways, we get that, right? What's much trickier, and Adam, I'm fascinated by the use of the word skills, right? Because a lot of times when people talk about skills, they're talking about things like writing and creative thinking and critical thinking. And Emily, what's difficult with those, right, is identifying objective, observable, measurable things. And let's be honest, that's part of how the 5-paragraph theme emerged, because you said, let's talk about the argument. Okay, we know that most good arguments are going to have some type of a thesis, right? They're going to have a strong stand that's made. And they're going to have reasons, 3 or 4 of them that support that stand. And each of those reasons are going to have 2 to 3 pieces of evidence. You get where I'm going with this, right? I mean, it literally leads to the 5-paragraph theme. And so I mean, it's this fascinating space that we're kind of stuck in, because part of it is what even trying to take the more complex things like creative and critical thinking and argument development and analysis and synthesis. Like analysis, we know, okay, well, good analysis. Are you breaking down the thing that you're looking at? Are you comparing and contrasting a thing? When you compare and contrast, what steps? And the minute we start to try to operationalize those so we can build them into rubrics, we get into that bind of, is this becoming too formulaic, or has it already led to the formulas that we make fun of, like the 5-paragraph theme? And I guess there's just a part of me that sees it as this, I don't want to call it a vicious cycle, but it's just it's the complexity of it, right? That we're stuck in a system that's forcing us to give a grade, even if the whole course is something like it's organized specifications grading or contract, or, where it's at the very end. There's just this final conversion to the grade to appease the institutional system, right? But everything else is different. Even in those cases, though, when we're starting to try to help students be able to articulate what is quality or rigorous or good thinking, argument, created, right? That becomes difficult. And I waffle. I'll just say that. I mean, over 20 years, I know I have moved around on how I handle that. But Emily, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think you hit some of the complexities of what we're dealing with.
So I want to throw an example out there, and maybe a little wrinkle into this too, like this idea of the skills and what we're assessing and looking, staying with that 5-paragraph essay form. And I in my undergrad, I was an English major and media arts minor. I did literary analysis. I did film analysis. I wrote a ton of papers, and now I look like what's out there now. When you look at YouTube and the breakdown videos, I did air quotes for my listeners there, and listening to what they're doing, breaking down movies or breaking down books, right? They're essentially doing an analysis of this, right? And they're doing it on video. They're doing it in a more what is typically seen as a creative form. You have to assume like those are scripted, right? Like, so they're writing a script of what they're going to say, and they're essentially following that 5-paragraph format in a breakdown video. That's something maybe more engaging. They can add cool visuals and, clips behind them or images, things like that, and whatnot. And, so is that less impactful than writing an essay? If they were, write a script and do it on video, is it more? Are they getting the same skills? Are we looking at the same, type of thing and giving students an opportunity to maybe do something in a less traditional way, but more relevant way for them by getting them to look at alternate formats? Like Emily said, like, what is this assignment? Like, what are we getting at? Like, what are we trying to actually assess the students on? And I think it's having that awareness of where the students are coming from now, right? We all came from, a pre-YouTube existence, but students are in it. And this is like, how do we meet them more where they are, so that we can tap into, like, what they are good at and how they can get us what, meet those objectives in classes with ways that really are relevant to them, but still rigorous. Can't forget that rigor.
Oh no, I mean, Chronicle of Higher Ed just posted something this week on, the problems with rigor.
Yeah.
Adam, I just want to say, I think you answered your own question.
Right.
Right. In terms of just, it's the outcomes, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
But I just want to share a quick example of that. So over the years, I've done a bunch of WAC, writing across the curriculum workshops. So meaning as a writing studies person, working with faculty and other disciplines to help them. And one of the things we always try to suggest is like understanding what your outcomes are. And then once you kind of have that, lots start to realize it doesn't have to be an essay, because they're looking more at the outcomes are about, can you demonstrate that you've learned this content associated with the course, which then actually frees up like genres or media. And I'm just going to say, to date, my favorite alternative assignment was a professor from marketing that assigned the eulogy of a brand. So what happens when Coke dies, and how do you eulogize that, right? Because getting at, and I like Emily and Reese both get it. So part of alternate we're starting to hint at is, does it have to be the traditional testing methods or assessment methods too, right? Not only how we grade it, but how we assign it. And I love that, because at that point it's like, oh, it's less about demonstrating argument in a flat, tired genre of the term paper, and it can be something else, because depending on what it is the instructor needs. I want to read more about or Pepsi. I'm a Pepsi fan. So
I think a lot of it also goes to just universal design principles and student autonomy, and deciding how they feel their strengths will allow them to submit the final product, whatever that looks like. The components are there. So if it's a 5-paragraph essay that they're strongest at, great, go for it. But if it's, hey, I am much better speaking or creating an Adobe web page or making a podcast, who cares? So you have those building blocks there, and it's just however the student wants to put them together. That's what really counts in the end, in my opinion.
And I think that goes back to, go for it, Brian.
I was just going to say, I'm grading all of you on how you're participating. So we've gone off on a couple of tangents here about the 5-paragraph format. So you're all getting points off for that. You've all added something that you're earning some bonus points for. So it's all going to even out in the end. It's really easy to just take a step back and look at every individual's contribution and go, is this person learning and developing and growing? And can I measure that? And if I can, do I have to check every single box on the rubric, or can I add in a special extra box where they get some extra points because I see there's this development that's on a slightly different track than what we're going down, but they're going to be able to use it somewhere else later on. And I think that's really important. And I think one of the drawbacks that we face right now, one of the big hurdles is, how do we teach our instructors to recognize that a student is effectively learning and then demonstrating stuff? Because they're so set in the old, here's the rubric, I'm going to check off the boxes. And then, if you don't get one of those, obviously you didn't do that thing. One of the podcasts we talked previously about providing alternate ways to turn in your work if you allow some students to put together a PowerPoint on this topic, and then others are going to do a voice thread, and some are going to do what's the equity? How do you make sure everybody's getting graded equally, depending on what the different kind of work that they're turning in? So that's one of my big things, is how do I convince my instructors as an instructional designer, think about this alternate grading way of doing things? Because really, in life, like if you think about sports, a touchdown is a touchdown. You're going to get a grade. Let's say that that's the grade. So the goal is a touchdown. How close to that did you get? Can I grade you on that? Some people look at it and go, either you got the touchdown or you didn't, and then we need to move on from that. Other people go, well, you got really close. So can I evaluate that closeness without upsetting some other students? Because other students are very much black and white. Either I did it or I didn't. So what are some methods that you might involve the students with alternate grading so that they aren't hyperventilating and going, am I doing this right? This is so nebulous to me. I don't know what this alternate grading is.
Reese, I'm just going to look at you and go like, I think you and I wrote about this.
We did.
I've been down this path before.
Tell us more.
I'm going to loft that at you.
So I think this is an area where we instructional designers can really shine, because so much of our just base level course development is about that alignment and getting to the learning outcomes. So if we really do the learning outcomes the way that we always tell our faculty they need to be done, which is actionable things, it's not that vague and abstract, it's something very specific. So if I am asking someone to define X, Y, and Z, well, if they define that in a very dry 5-paragraph essay, someone else defines that by making a lovely Adobe Express page, well, they've both done the same thing. They've met that outcome. So my approach to it, and what I think what Shelley's referring to, what we've studied and worked with, is this idea of what does learning look like, and how do we recognize it when it's happened? And it's so often tied very closely to those outcomes.
Also, though, I think, Brian, when Reese and I have worked together on getting faculty to do these multiple creative assignments, faculty start melting down and go like, how am I supposed to assess that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know what good writing is, and I look at them and go like, do you believe it? I know what good writing is. I don't know what a good video is, but I know what a definition in writing looks like. I don't know what a definition when it's only visual, or it's only visual in 1 or 2 words. And Brian, I think that's when we ask the students to help us, right? So multimodal composition scholars for years of, people are like assessment, and it's looking at them go like, have the student turn in the reflection. Let the student tell you what they were doing and why they were doing it that way. And in the act of articulating that, and whether it's written reflection or a video, a walkthrough video of their static visual, whatever it might be, that's where the student is going to help demonstrate that learning, right? They're going to say, well, this abstract red circle right here mashed together with the crisp corners of the yellow square, and I'm totally making that up, but it's defining something, dang it.
But in our research, and in the research that Shelley and I did, we're looking at students' work when they've submitted multimodal work, and we're trying to determine, did they meet the learning outcomes? And what we pretty quickly figured out is we could have the assignment prompt, we could have the student work, we could have the student grade. We could not tell ourselves in so many of them unless there was a reflection added. When there was a reflection, you could see so clearly what was going on, because you can ask students, describe this to me, and they will tell you. And, I think if we kind of step back from our position as educators and being involved in education, learning's hard. Learning is messy, and it's not just like checking a box. And, if we think about our own experiences with things, most of the time, some of the best learning actually comes from failure. So, imagine you're putting something together, it doesn't work, but when you get to the end, you say, oh, that piece went back there at the beginning. I needed that. So if you start it over, you have a whole different arrangement. So one of my favorite things to do when I teach, and it's something that I also highly recommend when working with faculty, is to include those reflections, not just a semester end reflection, because they're going to struggle to remember all the details, but with every little thing. And those can be really low stakes, very informal. And as Shelley said, can be writing, it can be a video, whatever. But it's really about the questions that you ask them. If you just ask students to reflect, you're going to get back what you've asked for, something kind of disconnected. But you can ask very specific questions, like some of my favorites are like, what are you most proud of in this work? What did you have the most trouble with? What would you change? If you could start it all over tomorrow, what would you do differently? And when you see that reflection from the student, that's where most of the assessment can actually happen, when it's used in comparison with what they've turned in.
And just going to add, you can even ask them to connect it to the learning outcomes. Brian,
Absolutely.
back to trying, I think one of the things that faculty are looking for is also assessment or grading that is, I don't want to say more simplified, but more efficient. And I mean, at that point, you're literally offloading some of the intellectual work back to the student, which, let's be honest, it's where it kind of should be anyways, right? You tell me what you're learning here, and I'll be like, you're right. This is fabulous. Great job.
And one thing I've learned about students over the years is they like to talk about themselves. They really do. And especially if they're doing something that they are excited about or passionate about or proud of, like, you're going to get even more. And, that's cool. Right. And that helps as an instructor too, for you to get to know your students as well. It's not only is it helping you assess, where they are in your course, if they're meeting their outcomes, but you're going to build that community also. And I know that's a, separate topic. We could go down a different rabbit hole, but that's important, especially in an online course where you're not meeting face to face, and you're not getting that, that necessarily, personal connection per se, but it's another, big point that I think reflection is great for.
Yeah, you're right, Adam. And just kind of adding to that, in addition to asking them to point out the things that they're really proud of, which, yeah, they're absolutely glad to share that. Students can also be very self-critical, but in positive ways, when you ask them to think back on, where they messed up. And I think that especially applies in courses where we're offering these alternate grading options, where there's no risk for them. It creates a little bit safer environment to be vulnerable about where they made mistakes, whether that mistake was having trouble with the tool they were using, or having trouble with the course material, or even something that's not associated with the course, but just, I got busy and I did not put in the time that I wish I had. Students can really be honest about that.
And I think another practical thing instructors can do, in addition to adding in a lot of reflection pieces with their assignments, is to have more opportunities for practice and touch points with lower stakes assessments. So if you're just doing reflections and you have a midterm, a big paper, and a final, that's probably not really going to get you where you want to go. And your students are, I mean, the reflection is helpful, but only 3 times for really big grade items, it's like, it's too much. So to really break it down and have it where students can take those failures and it's not going to make or break the grade at the end, that's where I think students, like Reese, you were saying, they're going to be more open to and be vulnerable with, hey, I did mess this up, and it's okay because I'm going to have 10 more times to practice it and get better. So building in smaller components in the course instead of just leaving it to bigger assignments is a practical thing instructors could take advantage of.
If you had scaffolding on your Futures in Digital Learning bingo card, I think you can mark that off right there. So thank you, Emily. We're always excited when we can bring up scaffolding in our podcast. But what are some other examples that we can do that, right? Like, like you brought up, Emily, like, breaking that down, chunking that out, not putting so much emphasis on the big assignments. And Shelley brought it up earlier about that anxiety, right? And we need to be more aware of and be more empathetic as instructors too with students, that they have more going on in their life than just school. And for the longest time, I think we came in with that idea that students are students and school is their priority, and it's not. And it shouldn't be. They have families, they have other things going on. So, what are ways that we can incorporate that into our design? Brian's got something to say there.
Yeah, let me clear my throat.
Yeah.
So I just worked on a 15-week advanced pharmacotherapy course. And every single week there is a quiz. And I said to the instructors, the quiz, if you're going to give them a quiz every single week, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to prove to yourself and to the student that they can memorize things. That's great. Everybody can memorize things, but they're memorizing drug information that is going to change in 6 months or 9 months. Then they're going to have to rememorize it. So the purpose of a quiz in this course, since you're giving one to them every single week, is not for you, the instructor, to check that they're learning. It's for the student to check that they're learning. So make it low stakes. Make it kind of like an attendance checkoff. If they take the quiz, it doesn't matter what their score is. It's for them to see, oh, I need to go back and reread chapter 3 because I totally messed up on the antivirals section. I did not understand it at all. So I need to go back because in 2 weeks, I have exam number 1, which is for the instructor to test if I'm learning what we've learned in all these past weeks. So that was one great sort of victory I had, was helping the instructor see the quizzes aren't to check that the students are learning. It's 100% for the student to check their own learning and be able to reach out to you and say, I don't get chapter 5. Help me out. Help me understand why I'm not connecting the dots. And maybe there's some easy way for me to, maybe I need a different type of learning for that chapter, and you can partner with me and help me, or pair me up with another student in the class, and we can work together to help me overcome that, whatever. So that was kind of a big victory, especially in a 15-week class. That's 15 quizzes. That's like, oh my gosh, students are going to be panicking over that until they go and see their grade book and they go, oh, it's only worth 5 points. That's not going to drop my grade at all. Even if I bomb every single one of them, that's not going to hurt my grade. But if I bomb every single one of them, chances are I'm not going to do well on the exams. So maybe I need to reconsider this course at this time.
I love that Brian brought us back to the distinguishing between assessment and feedback. And in this instance, the feedback is the machine. And I think that's Emily and Adam, I too, scaffolding, yay. But again, a lot of faculty go like, oh, you've just made me do more work and how I'm supposed to do that. And trying to remind them, well, there are a lot of mechanisms that can take off the weight, especially if it's meant to be safe learning, building towards. And, in this instance, it's once the quizzes are built, that runs by itself, right? And it still gives the students feedback. But if it's scaffolding towards big writing projects, it's not the instructor who has to give feedback every time. Students can give feedback to one another and still get feedback. It can still have a little point so they actually do it, but lower point so it's not the heavy weighted of the thing at the end, right? One of the key things about a lot of alternate or alternative grading systems is separating, or at least consciously distinguishing, what is being assessed and how is that feeding into this final grade thing, but what's actually the feedback, which is usually generally connected more with the learning.
Yeah. And I think too, it's we run into issues with instructors with 7.5 week courses. Like how do I break this down like so quickly, right? Or how do I build up to something so quickly in that short a time? And like you brought up, Shelley, like have the students do some of that, like put that on them. And there's, I think the tools, even simple tools within D2L, like the discussion forum, you don't have to just use it for discussion. There's ways that you can get students involved in doing some of that, giving some of that feedback and, that informal assessment through the discussion tool in D2L that are where students are engaging with one another in providing that. And you don't have to as the instructor, be the, all-knowing one that is having to provide feedback for 50 students every week for 7.5 weeks, right? Because that's overwhelming. I get it. Like we've all taught courses in some way or form, and that's hard. The students are eager to do things like that. So let them.
Definitely. And there, and keep in mind also, we have all these great tools that can shortcut some of that process during active teaching. I know, we've all talked about it. It's one of my favorite courses that I've worked on. I did a law course a couple of years back, uses H5P, which is a tool we support, works great with D2L. But we used the branching scenarios to build out choices for students. And they were over the course of several weeks. It was a 7.5-week course, but each one would add a new component and get more and more complex in the situation that came up. And it led students through some decision making. But there were a couple of factors there, referring back to what Brian was talking about. The laws around this particular topic are rapidly changing. It's a technology related law course. Those laws change all the time. So the instructor did not want students to make decisions based only on the law as it's written today. He wanted to be able to have them know how to find information and adapt, but it was more important to apply some of that critical thinking and put together different pieces of information. But the reason that we chose H5P was actually partially for time saving, so that as he built out the scenarios and offered choices for the students to make as if they are a professional in this field, he was able to put feedback in the tool so that as they made their decisions, they were getting instant feedback along the way. And we did also make those very low stakes. They were set up to be really completion graded. So if the student just made terrible decisions, they were learning along the way, they still got credit for it. But what we found was that when they were not high stakes grades, when they were given the points for just doing the work, a lot of students actually went back and did them multiple times to really think through the feedback they had received, rethink their choices. And because they're branching, each one is a little bit different based on the choices they make at each step. So it kept it a little bit fresher and more interesting for students. We got great feedback on that strategy.
I know, everybody who read Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid, when they picked that choice and you died, oh, you went back to that and you're like, no, I'm not dying here. I'm doing this again. So, Shelley, I know you had something to add to that.
I was just going to say, I feel like one of the things that's starting to come through here, though, is we're going like, yay, alternate grades, good stuff for, and we're talking about ways it's good for the students and ways it's good for learning and the ways it's good for the teachers, except for the one thing is a lot of what we're talking about is this is massive course overhaul, right? A lot once you really engage with a lot of these systems, and there's different ways, right? But a lot of times it becomes this committing to, I'm gonna have to redo the entire course. I mean, on some level, I think I'm thrilled that you all as instructional designers are talking about it, because right, because you have to wait for an instructor to have that epiphany. Have a minor meltdown. I've been there plenty of times, right? Have the minor meltdown, and then be thankful they have someone who's going to help them do that, right?
Yeah.
Because
and I think, for us as instructional designers, oftentimes, like, we have this grand idea of like, oh yeah, we can totally overhaul this course and redo it and it'll be awesome. And you're right, the instructors are like, whoa, like, slow down. And so then it becomes, okay, let's do one thing, and then maybe we'll come back and we'll do another, right? And then, so you're right, it's not something that necessarily happens overnight, or that is going to, but I think if we start having these conversations, we can start seeing a little bit more of that. And instructors too, when they see examples of other instructors doing it and what it looks like, they're more apt to do it themselves. And so, hopefully we can get more of that, get that ball rolling a little bit, because I think it's positive. It's positive for the students, right? And that's what ultimately we want to do. Well, thank you. This was a superb conversation.
We had a powerhouse with us today.
Yeah. This was great, and I think those listening will really enjoy it as well. And if you have questions, if you want to talk to an instructional designer about alternate grading, please let us know. Fill out the inquiry form on our website at ucat.arizona.edu. And get in touch with us if you have questions about H5P. That was brought up by Reese. We do support it. Contact our InTech team. Within UCAT as well. They can help you through any questions about H5P. And I know Shelley has been vocal all over campus, helping other instructors and answering questions as well. So I'm sure she would gladly answer anything and help anybody out who has questions. So awesome. Thank you again for joining us, Reese, Emily, Shelley. We really appreciate it. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. And tune in next month. We're going to kind of continue with some of the themes we brought up in this conversation. We're going to talk about creativity in online course design. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. So join us next month also. Thanks, everybody.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.